18, 2004, a quiet night in Farmersville, Texas, became the kind of nightmare small towns never forget. 20-year-old Rachelle Tolleson, a young mother with a 6-month-old baby girl, tucked her daughter in and stepped outside, never to return. When her mother found the infant crying alone hours later, panic swept through the town. Search parties combed the fields, prayers filled the air, until the truth emerged, darker than anyone could imagine. The man behind her disappearance wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone she knew. A neighbor. A man with a past, Moises Sandoval Mendoza. What began as a missing person case soon spiraled into one of the most chilling murders in Texas history, ending years later on death row with a haunting final apology. If you love true crime stories, please like this video, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. More real death row stories are coming. It was the night of March 18, 2004, in the small, tight-knit town of Farmersville, Texas. A place where everyone knew each other, where neighbors waved from their porches and locked doors were almost an afterthought. But that quiet sense of safety was shattered forever when 20-year-old Rachelle Tolleson vanished into the darkness, leaving behind her 6-month-old daughter, Avery, crying alone in her crib. Rachelle was in the middle of a difficult season in her young life. She was recently separated from her husband and had been living on her own, trying to rebuild her future while caring for her baby. Friends and family described her as strong, independent, and fiercely devoted to her daughter. She was the kind of young mother who worked tirelessly during the day and stayed up late at night, singing softly to her baby girl. Despite her challenges, Rachelle carried a quiet optimism, a belief that things would get better. That Thursday evening, the air was cool, still, and calm, the kind of night that promised nothing out of the ordinary. But sometime after 9 p.m., Rachelle stepped outside her small home. It's believed she went out to meet someone she knew, perhaps to talk, perhaps to help. She didn't take her purse. She didn't lock the door. She simply stepped into the night and never returned. Hours later, her mother, Donna Tolleson, arrived at the house, expecting to check on her daughter and granddaughter. Instead, she walked into a scene of silent chaos. The back door was ajar, the lights were still on, and the home showed signs of a struggle. A chair overturned, a blanket on the floor, and a few small drops of blood leading toward the door. But the most heartbreaking sight was Avery, alone, cold, and crying, still in her crib. Rachelle was gone. Panic spread quickly. Within hours, law enforcement and volunteers launched a search that stretched through the fields and wooded creeks of Farmersville. Flyers were printed, search dogs deployed, and helicopters circled overhead. The entire community came together, praying for her safe return. But as the hours turned into days, that hope began to fade. There were no calls, no sightings, no trace of her car leaving town. It was as if Rachelle had vanished into thin air. To those who knew her, the thought of Rachelle running away was unthinkable. She adored her baby girl, Avery. Her entire world revolved around her. Family photos showed her smiling brightly, holding her daughter close, her eyes full of love and purpose. Friends recalled her laughter, her kindness, and the way she always tried to see the good in people, even those who didn't deserve it. As police retraced her steps, one name began to surface: Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a man who lived nearby and had known Rachelle for some time. He was older, quiet, and often seen in the area. Some said she had once helped him with odd jobs. Others believed she had gone to see him that night. Whatever the reason, investigators knew one thing: Rachelle's disappearance was no accident. The search for Rachelle Tolleson was just beginning. What no one yet realized was that her story would soon reveal a level of cruelty and darkness that would shake the entire state of Texas, and end years later with the man responsible strapped to a gurney in the Huntsville death chamber. But on that cold March night, all anyone knew was that a young mother was missing, her baby was crying for her, and a small Texas town was about to wake up to a nightmare that would never fade from memory. As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Rachelle Tolleson, one name began to surface again and again: Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a man who lived just a few miles away. At first glance, Mendoza seemed unremarkable, a 20-year-old laborer, quiet, withdrawn, and known around Farmersville as someone who mostly kept to himself. But beneath that quiet exterior lay a troubled past filled with violence, rage, and a darkness few had ever seen up close. Detectives soon learned that Rachelle and Mendoza had known each other for several years. They had met through mutual friends and even attended the same high school in the area. Rachelle, being her usual kind-hearted self, had occasionally spoken to him. Some said she tried to help him with small favors or errands. Mendoza, however, appeared to interpret her kindness as something more. In his warped mind, that simple decency became an invitation, and ultimately, an obsession. When police first questioned Mendoza, he told a simple story: that Rachelle had stopped by his house that night, and the two had gone out together to buy cigarettes. According to him, she dropped him off afterward, and that was the last he saw of her. But as the days went on, his version of events began to crumble. investigators obtained evidence that painted a far darker picture. Forensic technicians discovered that Mendoza had entered Rachelle's home through an unlocked back door that night, the same one her mother later found ajar. Witnesses recalled seeing Mendoza at a small get-together at Rachelle's house days before her disappearance, acting strangely, watching her closely. It became clear that this was no chance encounter. Mendoza had planned it. When confronted with the mounting evidence, fibers, traces of blood, and signs of struggle, Mendoza's calm facade began to fracture. At first, he denied any involvement. But then, after hours of interrogation, he lowered his head and muttered the words that sent chills through the room. "I did it. Killed her. I don't know why. Something evil took over me." His confession revealed the unimaginable. Mendoza admitted that he had gone to Rachelle's home that night, knowing she was alone with her baby. Once inside, he attacked her. He strangled her, sexually assaulted her, and stabbed her in the throat, killing her in cold blood. Afterward, he wrapped her body, placed it in her car, and drove to a remote field outside of Farmersville. There, he dumped her remains in a shallow ditch and tried to erase the evidence by setting her body on fire. But even as the flames burned, he returned later that night, terrified that someone might find her, and moved the remains to a nearby creek bed, where he tried to burn her again. The brutality of the crime was beyond comprehension. Investigators would later describe it as one of the most horrific and senseless murders in Collin County's history. The young mother's final moments were marked by pain and betrayal, attacked by someone she had once trusted. But what drove Moises Mendoza to such monstrous violence? Was it rage? Lust? Madness? Or had his years of isolation and bitterness finally exploded into something uncontrollable? Psychologists later described Mendoza as a man consumed by resentment, a ticking time bomb of anger and rejection. His prior record included assault and sexual violence, and he had a long history of substance abuse. It was clear that Rachelle had become the tragic target of his twisted need for control, an innocent life destroyed by a man whose humanity had long since faded. As word of his confession spread, Farmersville fell silent. The hope that Rachelle might still be alive turned to grief and fury. Her family, once praying for her return, now faced the devastating reality of how her life had ended. And for detectives, the case had transformed from a desperate search into a pursuit of justice, one that would lead straight to the courtroom, where Mendoza's own words would seal his fate forever. 6 days after Rachelle Tolleson disappeared, the search came to a tragic end. On March 24, 2004, a ranch worker near Brushy Creek, just south of U.S. Highway 380 between Farmersville and Princeton, Texas, noticed a strange and unsettling odor drifting through the area. Following the scent, he discovered what appeared to be the remnants of a fire, ashes, debris, and partially burned materials spread across a secluded field. When investigators arrived, they quickly confirmed the horrifying truth. Among the ashes were human remains. What they found was badly burned and partially decomposed, but through dental records, the remains were positively identified as those of Rachelle Tolleson. Back at Rachelle's home, police had already noted signs of a violent struggle. The back door was left open, furniture overturned, and personal belongings scattered. It appeared that Rachelle had been taken from her own house in the middle of the night. These details supported investigators' growing belief that she had been abducted, rather than leaving voluntarily. Her 6-month-old daughter, Avery, had been left behind in the home, alive but unattended, an image that haunted officers and neighbors alike. Forensic teams began working methodically at the scene near Brushy Creek. Under bright floodlights, they sifted through ashes and charred soil, collecting bone fragments, melted debris, and any traceable evidence that might point to the killer. Even in the midst of such damage, small pieces told the story of a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. A melted piece of metal, fibers, and remnants of clothing were all carefully catalogued and sent for lab testing. Attention soon turned toward Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a man who had known Rachelle from school and was among the last people seen with her. Investigators obtained a warrant to search Mendoza's home and the surrounding property. Inside, they found multiple signs linking him to Rachelle. Forensic tests revealed that fibers found in Rachelle's car matched those from Mendoza's residence. Blood traces discovered on his carpet reacted under luminol, and a knife recovered near his property was consistent in blade width and pattern with the stab wound to Rachelle's throat. Surveillance evidence added another disturbing layer. Around the same time Rachelle's body was found, Mendoza had purchased lighter fluid at a nearby store. Combined with the burned condition of her remains, this detail strongly suggested premeditation and a calculated attempt to conceal the crime. The most decisive moment came when one of Mendoza's acquaintances came forward to police. The man reported that Mendoza had privately confessed to killing Rachelle, describing details that had not been made public. Acting on this information, police moved swiftly. On the evening of March 24, 2004, Moises Mendoza was arrested and taken into custody. During interrogation, he initially denied involvement, but as evidence mounted, The forensic matches, the witness statements, the inconsistencies in his story, his composure began to crack. Eventually, Mendoza confessed. He admitted to strangling Rachelle, stabbing her in the throat to make sure she was dead, and later setting her remains on fire in an effort to erase the evidence. With his confession secured and the forensic trail complete, the investigation reached its devastating conclusion. The young mother's disappearance, once shrouded in uncertainty, was now confirmed as a brutal and senseless murder. The discovery of Rachelle Tolleson's remains marked not only the end of a desperate search but the beginning of a long and painful journey for justice, one that would take years to complete. After over 2 decades of legal battles, appeals, and the slow march of justice, the story of Moises Sandoval Mendoza reached its grim conclusion on the evening of April 23, 2025, at the Huntsville Unit, Texas State Penitentiary, where Texas carries out its death penalty executions. Mendoza, 41 years old, had spent the last 21 years on death row, isolated in solitary confinement at the Pulaski Unit, reflecting on the life he had led and the choices that had brought him to this moment. For years, Mendoza had pursued appeals at both the state and federal levels, citing claims of ineffective legal counsel, procedural errors, and challenging evidence. Every appeal, however, was ultimately denied, leaving the sentence of death to be carried out. In those years, he remained under the strict conditions of solitary confinement, a world defined by small routines, writing letters, reading religious texts, and occasionally speaking of haunting hallucinations of Rachelle's voice. Though some described him as calm and detached, others noted the occasional glimpses of regret and acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. On the day of his execution, Mendoza was led into the death chamber of the Huntsville Unit, where witnesses from both the victim's family and his own were present. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, the weight of decades of grief and anticipation hanging in the air. Mendoza was strapped to the gurney, and prison officials performed the final medical and security procedures. Before the lethal injection began, Mendoza was given the opportunity to speak his last words. In a mixture of remorse and solemnity, he addressed both the family of Rachelle Tolleson and his own loved ones. Speaking first to the victim's family, he said, "I am sorry for having robbed you of Rachelle's life. I'm sorry for that. I know nothing that I could ever say or do would ever make up for that. I want you to know that I am sincere. I apologize." He then turned to his own family and spoke in Spanish, expressing his personal sentiments. "I love you, I am with you, I am well and at peace." At 6:40 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. The state of Texas carries out executions using a 3-drug protocol, designed to first render the inmate unconscious, then paralyze, and finally stop the heart. Witnesses observed as Mendoza's breathing slowed, and within minutes, he was pronounced dead. There was no public record of a last meal for Mendoza, making this final ritual another quiet and solemn aspect of the event. For the family of Rachelle Tolleson, the execution brought a complex mixture of closure, relief, and lingering grief. While justice had been carried out, the loss of a daughter and mother could never be undone. Her 6-month-old daughter, Avery, who had survived the tragedy at the time of her mother's murder, had grown up knowing only a fragmented story of her mother, now permanently tied to the history of Mendoza's crimes. The story of Moises Mendoza is not just one of crime and punishment, but also of the ripple effects of violence. The innocence taken, the lives disrupted, and the enduring scars left on family, community, and the criminal justice system itself. It reminds viewers of the fragility of life, the depths of human cruelty, and the painstakingly slow process through which justice seeks to honor victims and provide accountability. As we reflect on this case, it is crucial to remember Rachelle O'Neal Tolleson, not merely as a victim, but as a young woman with dreams, love, and a family who adored her. Her life, tragically cut short, continues to resonate through every retelling, every court document, and every tribute to her memory. Thank you for joining us through this story. If you found this account insightful, please like this video, share it with others, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping true crime stories that uncover the real events, the victims' lives, and the consequences faced by those who commit these crimes.